My father died last night. Pack your things and get out of that house today. Those were the exact words my older sister screamed into the phone at 7:20 in the morning, and behind her voice I could hear my brother-in-law laughing, actually laughing, saying they were finally free of the old man. I stood frozen in the kitchen, not because I was grieving, but because the man they had just declared dead was sitting 3 feet away from me, very much alive, holding his morning coffee in his shaking hand. What happened in the next few months would tear my family apart, expose a betrayal 12 years in the making, and prove that even a broken old soldier still has one more fight left in him. My name is Casey Kane, and this is the story of how my father came back from the dead to destroy the daughter who buried him alive. Before I tell you what happened that morning, you need to understand who my father was. Colonel Walter Kane spent 30 years in the United States Marine Corps. He carried men out of burning vehicles. He held the line in places most of us will never hear about. He came home with a titanium knee, shrapnel scars across his shoulder, and a silver star he never once bragged about. I followed him into service as a combat medic, and by the time I made major, I understood something about my father that civilians never could. Strength is not about how loud you are. It is about how still you can stay when everything around you is falling apart. My older sister Diane never understood that lesson, and honestly, she never wanted to. Diane was the golden child growing up, the one who got the new car, the one who got bailed out of every bad decision, the one my father quietly forgave over and over again, because that is what fathers do. She married a man named Grant Foster, a smooth-talking venture capitalist with a fake tan and an even faker smile, and together they built a life that looked expensive on the outside and was rotting on the inside. I spent my holidays overseas patching up wounded Marines while Diane spent hers carving turkeys in a house my father paid for. That imbalance built slowly for years, quiet and invisible, until it finally cracked wide open. The morning it happened, I had just moved back home to take care of my father after his heart surgery. I was standing by the refrigerator when his cell phone rang, and Diane's name lit up the screen. My father put it on speaker, expecting a normal conversation, but what came out of that phone was pure venom. She told him he was not getting a single dime, and to pack his bags immediately. In the background, Grant was laughing, saying they were finally rid of the old man. My father sat there in silence, his broad shoulders slowly caving in, absorbing the fact that his own daughter thought he was already gone. Then my father leaned toward the phone and said 4 words in a voice that sounded like it came from the bottom of a well. "No, Diane. I am still breathing." The line went dead silent. No apology, no relief, no gasp of joy that her father had survived. Just a click. She hung up. That silence told us everything we needed to know. She was not scared because he might be sick. She was scared because he was still alive, and that meant the inheritance she had already started planning was still locked behind a living, breathing man she had just tried to bury on speakerphone. I did not run to hug him. I did not offer empty comfort. Years as a medic taught me that panic kills faster than the wound itself, and right now my father did not need tears. He needed a sentry standing watch while he processed the ugliest kind of betrayal there is. I quietly stepped back, gave him space, and kept my eyes locked on the small orange bottle of nitroglycerin pills sitting on the counter, just in case his heart decided to join his heartbreak. For a long time, the only sound in that kitchen was the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of a proud man trying to hold himself together. Then the landline rang again, sharp and sudden, slicing through the silence like a blade. It was our family lawyer, Charles Whitfield, a man who never called before 9 unless something was seriously wrong. He told us someone had just contacted his office claiming to be a hospital administrator, reporting my father as deceased, and demanding the immediate release of the estate. My grip tightened around that phone until my knuckles went white. I told him we were on our way, and as I hung up, I looked at my father sitting quietly at that counter, and I understood something with total clarity. This was not a misunderstanding. This was war, and it had just crossed the wire. We drove to the lawyer's office in complete silence, my father staring blankly through the windshield like a man trying to process a bullet wound that had not started bleeding yet. Charles slid a thick folder across his desk and explained that Diane had called that morning demanding they execute an old will from 12 years earlier, back when she was the untouchable favorite child who was set to inherit everything. What she did not know was that my father had quietly rewritten that will 5 years ago, cutting her back to an equal share, and naming me the one responsible for protecting his interests. She had built her entire plan on outdated paperwork, and it was already crumbling beneath her. But the real gut punch was still coming. Charles pulled out a small note and told us that 6 months earlier, Diane and Grant had come into his office asking very specific questions about conservatorship laws, about how to legally override a parent's medical decisions. My stomach turned cold as I did the math in my head. 6 months ago was Thanksgiving, the same dinner where my father had briefly forgotten the code to his gun safe, and Grant had joked about revoking his command privileges while everyone laughed it off as harmless teasing. It was not a joke. It was reconnaissance. They had been quietly testing him, looking for cracks they could use to prove he was losing his mind. My father sat there absorbing every word, his massive hands pressed against his face, the same hands that once held a rifle steady under enemy fire now, trembling from a wound his own daughter had inflicted. I did not offer comfort. I offered a plan. I picked up the truck keys, gave Charles a single firm nod, and told my father it was time to go home and reset the perimeter. Whatever peace we thought we had built in that house was gone, and the only way forward was to prepare for a fight neither of us had asked for, but both of us now had to win. That afternoon, Diane came storming through the front door in a cloud of expensive perfume, mascara perfectly smudged, tears streaming down in what looked like a performance rehearsed 100 times. She rushed toward my father, calling him Dad, saying she thought he was dead, saying the hospital would not tell her anything. But my father did not move. He sat there like carved stone and asked her one simple question. Why did you not just call Casey? Her tears vanished instantly, replaced by a hardened, calculating expression, the mask finally slipping off completely in front of both of us. Grant stepped in beside her, dressed in his designer sweater, pointing his finger at my father and saying he was slipping, forgetting things, getting confused, and that they were just looking out for him. Then Diane turned on me, accusing me of brainwashing him, of isolating him from his family with what she called sick military discipline. I stood there in complete silence, arms behind my back, letting her scream herself hoarse. When she finally ran out of breath, I looked her dead in the eyes and said the only sentence that mattered. You do not care about his health, Diane. You care about the deed to this house. She snapped. All pretense of the grieving daughter disappeared, and she told us flat out that she was not going to let a brainwashed little sister steal what belonged to her, that they had already filed for conservatorship that morning, and that we would see them in court. She stormed out with Grant scurrying behind her, the front door slamming so hard it rattled the pictures on the wall. My father sat there in silence for a long time, his head bowed low, and I understood in that moment that the real battle had not even started yet. Less than a day later, a process server knocked on our door and delivered a thick envelope containing a formal petition for emergency guardianship. To fight it, my father was forced to undergo a cognitive evaluation, a humiliating process where a young doctor asked a decorated Marine colonel to count backward from 100 and identify the name of a chair. I stood outside that door listening to his voice shrink smaller with every question, and when we finally walked out into the freezing parking lot, he leaned against the truck and told me that he had commanded 1,000 men overseas, and now he was being graded on whether he remembered a simple word. A single tear slid down his weathered face, and I had never seen anything harder to witness in my life. The gossip spread through our small Ohio town almost overnight. At the grocery store, an aunt who once adored me now sprinted the other direction just to avoid eye contact. A neighborhood busybody named Donna blocked my cart on purpose, loudly announcing in front of strangers that she had heard the colonel was slipping, and that I was keeping him locked away from everyone. I did not explain myself. I did not defend my name. I simply pushed her cart aside and walked past her in total silence, because explaining yourself to people who already believe the lie is a waste of time you cannot get back. That was the moment I decided to stop playing defense. I drove straight to the office of Rachel Donovan, a former prosecutor, who did not keep tissues on her desk because she had no patience for tears, only facts. She pulled bank statements showing that $187,000 had disappeared from my father's accounts over the past year. funneled directly into a shell company tied to Grant's failing business. At the bottom of the paperwork was a shaky, crooked signature belonging to my father, dated the exact day he was on a hospital gurney fighting for his life during emergency heart surgery. The same day, Diane put a pen in his trembling hand and told him it was just routine paperwork. Sitting in his dark bedroom that night, my father asked me the most heartbreaking question I have ever heard from him. He asked if he was actually losing his mind, if maybe he had given away the money and simply forgotten. That is the true poison of a betrayal like this. It does not just steal your money. It makes you doubt your own memory, your own sanity. I knelt down, took his cold hands in mine, and told him the truth as clearly as I could. He had not forgotten anything. His daughter had used his love as a weapon and stabbed him with it. The turning point came the next morning when Rachel forwarded us a screenshot her investigator had found, a text conversation between Diane and Grant from months earlier. Grant had written that if this ever blew up, the old man would tear them apart. Diane responded with pure arrogance, saying he was too proud to ever drag the family name through a public fight, that he would always cover for her, that they were fine. I watched my father read those words in silence, and I saw something shift behind his eyes. The grieving father was gone, and the Marine colonel had returned. He walked to his closet and pulled out his old dress uniform, the deep blue wool still holding its shape after all these years. I told him to put it on, and 30 minutes later we walked into the local Veterans Hall together. The moment the men inside saw that uniform, every single one of them stood up and saluted him in unison. For the first time in months, my father stood taller, his voice steady, surrounded by men who understood exactly what honor and sacrifice actually meant. That afternoon, he sat down in Charles' office and signed a new will without a single shake in his hand, cutting Diane out completely and permanently. The courtroom hearing was set for a cold gray Thursday morning. My father walked in wearing his uniform, cane in hand, spine straight as a rifle. Diane sat across the room in pearls, trying to look like the concerned daughter. But the moment my father's eyes met hers, her composure cracked. Her lawyer stood up and painted me as a controlling military daughter isolating a confused old man, then produced the power of attorney my father had signed on that hospital gurney, framing it as proof he trusted Diane completely. It was designed to be a trap either way, he answered. My father looked directly at Diane and said only that he used to trust her, and for a moment it looked like they had won. Diane actually smiled. That is exactly when Rachel stood up holding the bank statements bound in red tape, and asked Diane in front of the entire courtroom to explain exactly which paragraph of that document authorized her to wire $187,000 into her husband's failing company. The room went dead silent. Diane could not answer. Her face drained of all color. My father rose to his feet on his own, planted his cane firmly on the floor, and told the judge that his own daughter had celebrated his death at 7:20 that morning while he sat 3 feet away, still breathing. The mask shattered completely. Diane turned on Grant in a blind panic, screaming that it was his idea, that his failing company forced her hand. Grant fired right back in front of everyone, exposing that she had planned the entire thing, certain her father would simply eat the loss to protect the family name. The judge slammed her gavel and denied the conservatorship completely, ordering the financial records forwarded straight to the fraud division. We walked out of that courtroom without looking back, but Diane chased us into the hallway, grabbing my sleeve, hissing that I had brainwashed him and turned him against his own blood. I removed her hand from my jacket and told her calmly that she stripped herself of the title of daughter the second she celebrated his death on speakerphone, and that she should never dirty our family name again. I turned my back on her and walked my father out into the cold Ohio air, leaving her standing alone in the wreckage of everything she had tried to build on lies. The months that followed were quiet but final. Diane was legally forced to repay what she had stolen. Without my father's money propping them up, Grant's business collapsed within weeks, their luxury cars were repossessed, and they were forced into bankruptcy and a small rented apartment. My father made sure his granddaughter's college funds stayed protected, but placed under an independent trustee so Diane could never touch a single dollar of it again. It was not about revenge. It was about drawing a boundary strong enough that it could never be crossed twice. Around town, The same people who once whispered about me began avoiding eye contact entirely once the truth came out. I never asked for an apology. I never needed one. Months later, my father received a handmade birthday card from his youngest granddaughter, crooked crayon stars and a message that simply said, "Happy birthday, Grandpa. I love you." He pinned it to the refrigerator, and I watched years of tension finally melt from his shoulders. Beside it sat a court-ordered restitution check from Diane, cold and meaningless compared to that one small piece of construction paper. Eventually, my father agreed to meet Diane one final time at a quiet diner, just to close the door for good. He came home 45 minutes later, lighter than I had seen him in a year. She had finally admitted the truth out loud, that she had started dividing up his life while he was still breathing. My father forgave her quietly, in his own heart, because carrying hate that heavy eventually breaks your own back. But forgiveness never meant handing the keys back. There was no dramatic hug, no fairy tale reunion, just a father who finally understood exactly where his boundaries needed to stay. Now some mornings we still sit at that same kitchen island drinking black coffee, and when the phone rings unexpectedly, my father just glances at me with a dry smile and tells me I better answer it, because last time I ignored a call, he found out he was dead. And we laugh, a real laugh, the kind that echoes through a house that finally feels safe again. Age may take a person's strength, their memory, even their independence, but nobody, not even your own child, has the right to take away their dignity. If you have ever had to build a wall between yourself and someone who shares your blood just to protect the people you love, you already understand the truth in this story. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own father, your own family, or your own fight to protect someone you love, hit the like button, subscribe to Father's Love, and drop a comment letting me know where you are watching from. Stories like this deserve to be heard, and every share helps another family who might be fighting the exact same silent war right now. Thank you for staying until the very end.